Welcome, everybody. My name is Neil Milner, and I'm the second vice chair of the Board of Directors of the Greater Sudbury Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to welcome you to the Northern Ontario Liberal Caucus Town Hall. Today's event is hosted in partnership with the Northern Ontario Chamber Network, with chambers from Thunder Bay, Sault Ste. Marie, Greater Sudbury, Timmins, and North Bay, and is proudly sponsored by our local sponsors, including East Lincoln Sudbury, and the Community Economic Development Commission and Entrepreneur Center in Thunder Bay. Every business in our communities is heavily impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic and is also subject to rapidly changing government legislation and support mechanisms as they are announced. As a result, the decisions made by governments are critical for the ongoing success of our local businesses. When the Chamber engages with elected officials, it provides our members with the opportunity to speak to government directly. In an effort to ensure that you remain informed with the most up-to-date and accurate information, we have facilitated this virtual town hall for you to learn how the Northern Ontario Liberal Caucus is supporting you throughout this pandemic. As our representatives in the federal government and around the federal cabinet table, sorry, there's a big blast there that just shook my house. The town hall will progress as follows. I'll ask Caucus Chair Paul Lefebvre to introduce our panelists and to provide some opening remarks. And then we'll open up the floor to questions from the attendees. There is a Q&A box you will see on the bottom of your screen. Please enter your questions there and avoid entering them in the chat box because we won't be monitoring it. But please note that we will do our best to go through all the questions and that this town hall is being recorded and will be made available afterwards. I'd like to thank the caucus members for joining us today. And I'll now turn to Caucus Chair, MP Paul Lefebvre, for introductions and opening remarks. Following that, we will move into Q&A portion of our town hall.
Thank you, Neil. I really appreciate this, and thank you to the Chamber for doing this. I know we had a few engagements with you and your members, and this has been great, providing feedback to us. So I just want to take this opportunity to introduce the members, as you said, of Caucus. That appear on your screen. As you can, you've noticed that there's two that are absent. One, the Minister of Health, Patty Hajdu, Minister of Superior North. She's actually in a cabinet meeting right now, and she'll be joining us a bit later. We're hoping in the next 35 to 40 minutes that she'll be able to join us. As well as you've also noticed that the Member of Parliament for Nipissing-Timiskaming, Anthony Rhoda. Because Anthony is a Speaker of the House, he does not sit as part of our caucus. He's independent. Still a Liberal member, but because of his role, he does not join our meetings. He needs to remain independent. But I still wanted to have a shout out to Anthony right now. So let's go around as well. I'll introduce the others, and then I'll come back and say a few remarks with respect to some of the general programs that we have provided to businesses. So. We have Terry Sheehan. Terry is the MP for Sault Ste. Marie and Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister responsible for FedNor. We have Marc Serré as well. Marc is the MP for Nickel Belt, my neighbor, and certainly a strong advocate for the region of Northern Ontario. And we have Marcus Pawlowski is also joining us, and I'm glad Marcus was on the committee, just finished, so we'll get his insight as well as to what he's, obviously his insight with respect to his part of the world of Thunder Bay, Rainy River. So Terry, I'll pass it over to you and to say a few opening words and certainly your perspective from FedNor, the FedNor programs that are out there, and provide that to the members that are listening right now. Merci beaucoup. Est-ce qu'il y a des questions en français également aussi? Moi puis Marc, ça va me faire un plaisir de vous adresser en français. Puis même un peu plus tard dans mes commentaires, je vais faire des remarques en français. Merci. Terry.
Well, thank you very much, Paul, and thank you very much for organizing this, and to all the organizers, including the Sudbury Chamber of Commerce and all your sponsors that have stepped up to the plate to make this happen. You know, I'm pleased to be part of a very active Northern Ontario Liberal Caucus that meet regularly And we continue to meet throughout COVID-19 to discuss various issues. And I have the honor and privilege to be Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Economic Development for FedNor. And you know that the Minister, Minister Melanie Joly, is met frequently with a number of chambers of commerce, including the Northern Ontario network. In fact, when we announced the 75% wage subsidy, the increase from the 10% to the 75%, we had a teleconference with many of the people that are probably on the line now to discuss that. And, you know, at that point in time, I also had mentioned that, you know, we come up with a lot of these decisions. People ask us, the media and our constituencies, about, you know, how do you arrive at these decisions? Well, we do it through, you know, our network, through Northern Ontario, you know, Liberal Caucus. We do it through consultations with the chamber networks, and through consultations with our constituency and a whole host of other folks. So I wanted to appreciate your input on that. The minister also hosted another Zoom conference recently that was hosted and led by the Timmins Chamber of Commerce, where we went through a number of initiatives and whatnot, and as well the you know, the National Chamber of Commerce that the minister was on recently. So I'm here to speak, you know, about some of the recent investments that we've made, including the regional relief and recovery fund, which I'll delve into after our little introductory comments. But I just wanted to thank everyone again for listening in, and I'll pass over to my colleagues to give their introductory remarks too.
Marc, you want to say a few words? Marc, Seré?
Merci, Paul. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Again, the chamber, all the chamber networks, for your advocacy and for the business community. So it's really great to be part of a Liberal Caucus here, as indicated by Paul and Terry. We meet on a regular basis, advocating for Northern Ontario as a whole. So it's great to be part of the chamber network to answer your questions. I'll be brief. I'm not going to repeat anything that Paul or Terry said. Other to my opening remarks will just be, if there's any, obviously from internet perspective, it's crucial in Northern Ontario that we expand access to internet. Right now there is the CRTC fund of $750 million that the request for proposals have been extended to June 1st. So obviously we've been working, all the MPs, with service providers all around Northern Ontario to make sure that we get access to these funds. And also part of the budget in 2019, we've put $1 billion aside, and we're looking at shortly, because of COVID, things have been delayed a bit, but there'll be another request for proposal for the internet part of that fund. And also it's very important that from a federal perspective, we also work closely with the provincial government to make sure that we make our communities more accessible to broadband, which includes high-speed internet, obviously more on the cellular side too. So I'll leave my remarks brief, other than to say, looking forward to your questions and continuing to support the business community all across Northern Ontario. Merci. Alors, comme Paul l'a indiqué également, s'il y a des questions en français, on va pouvoir les prendre également en français. Alors, merci beaucoup. Salut. Miigwech.
Merci beaucoup, Marc. Merci beaucoup. Marcus, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and the committee's not over yet. I'm skipping out on 2/3 of it. I'm really, when Patty shows up, there's 5 of us here, and I feel like the fifth wheel, which I really am. I'm the newest person, but the other thing is that we have the 3 of you here, Mark, Paul, Terry, all who I think have really good business backgrounds, who can certainly speak more to our economic response to the crisis than I can. As for health, that's more my field. I've been a doctor for 35 years, but lo and behold, Patty's the Minister of Health, and so I leave it to Patty to speak from the health perspective too, which leaves me basically with seemingly almost no role here. But let me just say a couple things that I think is an issue in case it doesn't come up, and now it probably is going to come up, is for businesses obviously, as we start to open the economy up, we want to make sure we don't screw up. And by screw up, I mean we don't want to have a resurgence of the disease that we have to start re-implementing a lot of the social distancing. This is obviously causing our government billions and billions of dollars, but it's also, most importantly, costing a lot of lives, but it's also costing a lot of money, severely impacting a lot of people in your communities, in the business community. So we want to get it right. And I think one of the issues in getting it right is wearing masks. Now, I too feel like a bit like an idiot wearing a mask, especially when nobody else is wearing a mask. But I really think this is an important thing. There are a lot of studies that have come out recently suggesting that it's important, and it's important in that it prevents transmission from people who are infected, possibly people who don't realize they're infected because it's early on in the disease, to other people. So there have been a number of studies that show that it decreases transmission. There's been modeling that shows when you add wearing a mask to other social distancing measures that the effect is cumulative, and it goes a long way to slowing the spread of the disease. A lot of countries in Southeast Asia that have done very well in addressing the epidemic, they require masks to be worn in public places, places like Taiwan, Singapore, Thailand, and 90 countries around the world mandate some required use of masks, whether it's in public transit vehicles or in stores when people are in close proximity. Lastly, and in my mind, one of the most convincing things is there was an open letter by 100 prominent scientists in the United States to all the governors of all the states, asking them to consider mandating, requiring people to wear masks. And these are people from Harvard, Nobel laureates, Cambridge, Oxford, all the top minds. And their feeling was that the evidence shows that this really helps to reduce spread of the disease. So as we start to open things up, whether it's mandated or not, whether you look stupid or not, some people like me actually look better with a mask, but for a lot of people, maybe that's not the case. But I really encourage you, if you're starting to open things up, to encourage your business to use masks wherever possible. Thanks.
Thank you, Marcus, and thank you for that. And we're more than happy to have you on the team, and you play an important part, certainly as a voice for Thunder Bay Rainy River. Don't shortchange yourself there. So just very quickly, some of the programs that you're more than aware that we've introduced in the past 2 months since this has started. We have a new alphabet out there with new acronyms that we've all learned in the past 2 months. Some very important programs that have helped small businesses in Northern Ontario and across Canada. As you know, the CEBA, the Emergency Business Account, $40,000. Basically, this is federal government-backed loans through your chartered banks, as well as the credit unions, to access this $40,000. I know not everybody has have access to it, and that's why I'll let Terry say a few words on the FedNor program that has come in to help the ones that don't qualify. As you know, you needed a payroll between $20,000 and $1.5 million, and the reason is very simple. As the federal government, as we're providing these loans, we need to make sure that we can verify your business. That's why if you have a payroll number, payroll account, we know you're registered with CRA, we can verify and back check the actual amount of your payroll. So that leaves it provides a security and safety net when we are providing these loans. A very important program that has just started a few weeks back is the Wage Subsidy, and we just extended it to August 29th of this year. So basically paying up to 75% of the salaries of your employees if you have a reduction of 30%. Right now, last week also, the Minister of Finance came out and said, listen, we are looking at how do we adapt this program. The uptake has been good, but it's not as high as we think that it should be. And so we're looking for feedback from yourselves, from businesses, as to how we can adapt the program moving forward to help it out. And lastly, but there's a lot of numbers of different small programs, but I just want to address as well very quickly the landlord-tenant program that we put in, the SECRA. That's another acronym. And there's been a lot of frustration with this because the landlords are the ones that must be applying to the program. The way that the program works, because as I'll put my hat on as a lawyer, I was a corporate tax lawyer before, I entered into politics and certainly did a lot of commercial leases. So when it comes to leases, the province, this is provincial jurisdiction. So the fact that we came up with a solution between the federal government and the provincial government is something really to behold, that we came together, because it should have been the province alone doing this program. They didn't have the means to do it. We stepped in and said, okay, we're going to provide 37.5% of the subsidy of overall to up to $50,000 a month. But I know that the program, the details are not out yet. So when you have a landlord, and we know a lot of landlords, I have a lot of friends that are landlords that actually come up and say, well, we're not going to apply to this program. I just tell them, let's wait and see what the details are that are being worked out right now, because this is essential to, after wages, we know for small businesses, the other big thing on their bottom line is basically rent and their lease. So we put in measures in place. So I really want to say, if the federal government, if we can work with the provinces, and certainly the Trudeau government and the federal government coming together and creating a plan for small businesses, landlords and tenants can come together and work out a plan to make sure that they are able to help each other out as well. So I think this is the message, that we're all in this together. And I'll leave it at that. We'll move to the questions, but I just want to make sure that people are aware of maybe the background of that, and we cannot just change the program on our own. This is basically supposed to be led by the provinces. We are there to provide funding, but we understand though that there's frustration, but we're asking people, listen, we're working together on this, and let's we can have to make sure they're moving down that road together. So I'll leave it at that. Terry, if you want to say a few words on the FedNor and on the CFDC loans that we announced a few weeks ago.
Well, thank you very much, Paul. And again, thank you very much. And just picking up on some of Paul's comments, when the COVID-19 had begun and really started to take a foothold into Canada, into Ontario, into Northern Ontario back in March. And, what we did is made every effort to make sure that we were protecting the health and safety of Canadians. And, small businesses were on the front line of that, because we had asked, because of what Health Canada was saying, for people to, and going to what Marcus was saying as well, to do the proper social distancing, to stay at home. So, the province had indicated a number of businesses that would be required through law to not operate, and some that would under the Essential Services Act. And so when we began addressing these issues, we used every tool in the toolbox that we had to support the small businesses that were out there. But as you know, and everyone here online knows, that 5.7 million Canadians never had access to unemployment insurance, right? Never did. And they weren't eligible for Ontario Works and a bunch of other safety nets. So we cast out our net as far and wide as we could to catch as many people as quickly as possible. And that was the Canada Emergency Response Benefit that you're aware of, that many people have accessed, including to up until about today, there's almost 8 million people that have received at least one payment in that particular program. As we went through it, and through consultation, again, in my opening remarks with Chamber of Commerce and other people, we found that, we had to start tightening the mesh on a lot of these supports for small businesses, for individuals, and for communities. So we, changed some of the CERB benefit to allow $1,000 worth of income. So people that were working in healthcare or other places that wanted to offer some sort of assistance in business opportunity for people through urgent or required can now keep $1,000. In my opening comments, I also talked about the basically the wage subsidy, which was 10% at that time. Through consultation again with folks like Rory Ring and Sault Ste. Marie and people across Northern Ontario and Canada, the Minister Economic Development, Minister Jolie, who's at the Cabinet COVID-19 committee, had strongly advocated for an increase, especially for those businesses that were bleeding out cash bad. So we moved it to 75%. We also had the Canada Emergency Benefit that many people have applied for, and we're seeing hundreds of thousands of people being eligible for that. That's the $40,000 loan with some forgivability and some interest-free payments. So that was a $50,000, $1 million, criteria. And then again, through consultation, we changed it to 20,000, 1.5 million. We also had other programming that was available as well. And I'm not going to delve too much into it, but I've captured some of the main ones. And the reason why I bring that to your attention in my remarks is because even after all of that, in changing the criteria frequently, in response to this unprecedented time, we still found that there were people slipping through the cracks. And, I understand it. My background too has been noticed is in business and economic development. And we saw the fact that there was a bunch of people that organized themselves for personal reasons a certain way, that were dealing with market realities from last year for whatever reason, that still were not able to meet our criteria. However, we're operating in the as a small business in the communities across Northern Ontario. So what we did is put together a program called the Regional Relief and Recovery Fund. And that is for Northern Ontario, almost $50 million, almost split equally between FedNor and the CFDCs, the Community Future Development Corporations. And I really like the CFDCs, and your Northern Ontario Liberal Caucus has been strong proponents of them. And throughout the years, these people have been working in our local communities across Northern Ontario, helping businesses through expert business advice and through various loan programming. So what we did is we allocated money both to FedNor and to the CFDCs to try and catch those businesses that were falling through the cracks. Now today, you also saw that the Prime Minister announced that the Canada Emergency Business Account has been changed once together to further support more sole proprietors. Those folks that are hairstylists come to mind, that are renting chairs from another business, people that are paying people dividends, et cetera, and you can see that those people now will also be eligible. Further, again, through consultation availability. But for, again, those people that still do not qualify, they can apply to our Regional Relief Recovery Fund for similar programming with different criteria. So they can, enter into a dialogue with the CFDC anywhere in Northern Ontario. They can sit down, have a chat, and there's an opportunity for the CFDC then to provide funding where that business had applied to and was not eligible before for those programming, but still have cash flow issues, because as the provincial and territorial governments announce plans to reopen, businesses that have been sheltering in place or those that are operating right now have requirements. And, we are there to provide that advice through our networks. FedNor is one of the best known regional economic development agencies in Canada. It's certainly well known in Ottawa. We're always yelling very loudly about them. Over the last 5 years, we increased the funding by $60 million. So it was historic up until now. And with the $49.5 million in additional funding for the COVID-19, it's also significant. So Paul, that's what I would suggest is just sort of my kickoff and lead off. And for those people, that are interested and that have applied to our other programs that weren't successful, with a caveat, save and except the ones that can do a redo now, a redo and apply for the Canada Emergency Bank Account now that
been
changed is available, that they can now have another backstop to support themselves. And so I hope that you will take the opportunity to contact FedNor. You can go to canada.ca/coronavirus to see the criterias and to apply. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Terry. I really appreciate that. Thank you for those for that insight, and we're happy to have join us Minister Patty Haiju from certainly Northwestern Ontario. So thank you, Patty. You were in a meeting, so I told people that you were going to be a few minutes late. So glad that you were able to join us. So we wanted you to provide some opening remarks to the people of the Chamber of Commerce and their members from Northern Ontario, and your perspective as to the Minister of Health at the forefront of this pandemic. And I want to thank you for all the great work and the hard work that you're in Ottawa right now, and you're putting on the long hours to help Canadians from coast to coast to coast. So maybe share with us your insight as to how you're seeing this from your perspective.
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Paul, and thank you to everyone for joining us. And it's certainly a pleasure to join my Northern Ontario colleagues. And I, just like the rest of the world, we're doing everything virtually these days, but it is funny how easily you get used to this way of connecting. So I want to thank Paul and everyone for pulling this together and joining us. Yes, it's been an interesting journey, hasn't it? Especially for business. And when I think about the sacrifice that business has made to help flatten the curve, I think, you know, many of the businesses that you represent at the Chamber and many of your members, you know, your businesses were at the sort of forefront of taking those really hard decisions that really ultimately helped people practice in the early days, something that none of us actually knew what we were, you know, knew what it was, but that idea that we needed to socially distance and that we needed to stay at home. And we know that the sacrifices that you've been making as businesses is extreme and extraordinary. We know that many of you have reached out personally to our offices, but also nationally through various associations. And I can tell you that from a business continuity perspective, all of that advice that you've been providing us on how best to support small and medium-sized business has been invaluable. And hopefully you've seen your comments reflected in the kinds of measures that we've unfolded. And we know that there have been gaps, but we've been attempting to work obviously very closely with you to address those gaps. And I think the most recent economic development and community futures funding that will support you know, even those that weren't able to apply for the CEBA and the wage subsidy, you know, the entrepreneurs who I think not just are important to our economy, but actually are important to our social fabric, have the support they need to stay in business. Because obviously, as a member of Parliament from Thunder Bay, we've seen a renaissance in the last decade or so of our downtown cores, and it's largely young entrepreneurs who are, you know, starting businesses of all kinds and varieties and creating those communities that attract people and that help continue to grow the economy. Because obviously, it's one thing to bring people to the north, but it's about keeping them, and that's why the work that you do is so important. As the Minister of Health, I have the, you know, I guess what I would say is I'm cautiously optimistic that we're doing okay. I know that we have Dr. Marcus Pulaski on the line, and I don't want to step on any physician's toes. I'm not a medical professional, full disclosure, as my internet trolls like to remind me on a regular basis, but I do have a background in public health, and a long one at that, which has helped me understand quite a bit about the approach to managing COVID-19. I will tell you that the R number, which is the way that we rate sort of the rate of infection that's happening in Canada, is now just slightly below 1. The scientists say if we can get it even lower to 0.5 or so, that's, you know, obviously the lower the better. Essentially, it just means how many people one infected person will infect. So, you know, all that to say that Canadians have done an amazing job trying to reduce the spread in Canada. And by and large, despite the fact that we have some extremely serious situations in certain settings, and you all know them, but I'll speak to those in a minute, our hospitals are not overloaded. Our emergency rooms are keeping up, and things are looking cautiously optimistic. And I say it that way because actually this next stage, and you're all critically aware of this, is a very, very important step where we can't take our foot off the gas. Even though we have the opening up of businesses in Ontario, for example, and I know there's a staged approach under the Ford government's plan, the tendency for people who have been cooped up this long, who haven't been able to see their friends and family, who haven't been able to go shopping in their favorite stores, who really want to support all your businesses, by the way, is going to be that they want to go outside and they want to gather in groups and they want to, you know, get together. And that's a very human tendency. What we have collectively to do now, and I think it's the business community, it's government, it's the medical professionals, is to remind Canadians that we're not out of the woods yet. We don't have a vaccine and we don't have an antidote to this particular illness. And although we are learning more and more about it every day, and we have in fact seen our numbers go down dramatically across the country, even in, for example, Toronto and Montreal, two of our hotspots, we're still seeing a decline of cases. The reality is that it's still here. here and it's still in Canada. And so we're going to have to take those practices that we've all been talking about and learning about over the last several months and really reinforce them in workplace settings, in the community, and certainly at home. And that's where I think all of you play such an important role, because all of you are employers. Most of you are employers, I should say, but the majority of you are employers. And so you're going to have a critical role supporting the wellness of your workers and creating a culture where it is actually part of our practice to talk about how we keep each other healthy. So some of the things that you'll recognize all these, and they're what we would call sort of the most effective measures that will keep infection down in our communities. And they are: wash your hands. Like there's not too many times that you can wash your hands. Wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands when you go out, wash your hands when you come in, wash your hands. Soap and water, 20 seconds. Secondly, people have to stay home if they're sick. And, they need to reach out to their public health unit if they're not feeling well to see if their symptoms would warrant a test. And depending on what their symptoms are, most public health units now across the province are testing even if you have one symptom. And then thirdly, we have to continue to physically distance. And I think that this is the challenge, I think, for some businesses, depending on the nature of the business, is the tight spaces if you're thinking of a storefront business. So there's a lot of work reimagining how we offer services and products to our customers in a safe way. Now, the good thing is that there's a lot of thinking going on in that space too. And although most of you won't be federally regulated, there's a resource I wanted to share with you called the Canadian Centre for Occupational Health and Safety. And they've been really stepping up to create guidance documents for each sector. There's something there for retail, for transportation, for energy, for mining. And you can go onto the CCOHS. They're adding new resources every single day. And they're also collecting resources from other employers. And that might give you, if you haven't already thought about this, a starting point in terms of how you adapt or strengthen perhaps your processes in place that are already in place to protect your employees and therefore your business. Lastly, I'll just say, I think it's really important that we have a conversation, or we start to think about how we manage sick time. And I know that we're in a jurisdiction in Ontario where there is no requirement for anyone to provide paid sick leave. But I think as employers, it's going to be important that we think about how we encourage people to not come to work when they're sick so that they don't infect the rest of your staff and your customers, and B, how we ensure that our staff have all the information that they need to appropriately screen themselves and then reach out for testing if in fact they feel unwell. So there's a lot of work for all of us to do. At the government level, what we're doing in terms of many of these things is creating capacity for provinces and territories. So there won't ever be an issue around capacity, for example, to have as many tests as a province wants to conduct, or we're supporting, on the flip side, the acquisition of personal protective equipment that's non-medical in nature, as well as the medical PPE. That work is ongoing, and PPE is a whole other conversation that's very difficult. As you all know, it's a tight market, but we are committed to supporting you in many, many different ways. And as we have, more clarity in terms of what the needs are out there, we'll be able to work more efficiently with provinces and territories. So that's sort of the health minister's perspective on restarting the economy, but certainly I'm a member of parliament as well for Thunder Bay Superior North. So I'm interested to hear all and any comments, and thanks for having me tonight.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Patty. And just let everybody know as well, I know on the promo it said that we're over at 7 o'clock. We're making ourselves available right till you guys we run out of questions, certainly till at least till 8 o'clock, if not more. So Neil, over to you to moderate and to look at the questions and to throw them at us, and we'll share amongst us those that to try to answer to the best of our abilities the members' questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So certainly one of the topics of conversation that has come up repeatedly, I think this is broadband. So COVID-19 stay-at-home directives have seen many having to work from home relying on broadband. The federal government is aiming to connect 95% of Canadians to high-speed internet by 2026 and all Canadians by 2030. While this is encouraging for businesses in rural and remote regions, there is a concern as to how reliable this connection will be. What is the federal government doing to ensure that all rural and northern businesses can remain viable and competitive, having access to reliable broadband internet?
Well, thank you. And I'm going to pass that question over to Mark. Mark has been spearheading this topic. It's important for Northern Ontario, for any rural areas across Canada, and we've been at it since 2015, adding to it. And I know there's been some progress, and I know that there's a lot of advocacy from our part and a lot of funding put on the side. But I want Mark can give you a lot of insight to answer that question. Vas-y, Mark.
Oh, merci, Paul, and thank you for the questions, especially on the internet side. We've been hearing it all over Northern Ontario. All the MPs on this call have been active over the last, since 2015, to try and find solutions for the companies. Yes, as it's stated, we rolled out a plan last year to connect 90% of Canadians by 2021. Currently, there's about 86%. So to look at the question specifically, there's a few funds, and I would encourage you as businesses, you as individuals, to look at, go to the website connectednorth.ca, so that we could create data. Right now, Blue Sky, for example, that services North Bay, Sudbury area, Neonet and Timmins, Sault Ste. Marie, Economic Development, Thunder Bay, Kenora, have agencies that are funded by FedNor that will work with businesses to determine kind of those gaps. So the gaps right now with the private sector applying, the CRTC, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, there is a request for proposals by June 1st to connect. All the companies here in Northern Ontario are all private companies, so we need to work closely with them to look at funding from the province and from the feds to make sure that we work together, both levels of government, to support the private sector in this initiative. So when we look at the backbone, so our first priority in our first program 2 years ago, Connecting Canadians, was to get the backbone as more fiber optics deeper into the network. So we've achieved that. We got about 900 communities across Canada that have been connected now. From there, what we need to look at is more access to third party. So we get some of the smaller players all across Northern Ontario that could access some of the fiber networks that exist already, so that we could look fixed wireless more deeper into the network, so we get businesses connected and more homes. Obviously, when we look at linking that back to airports, the economic development aspect is really good for Northern Ontario to continue. So I would encourage businesses and individuals to look at the connectednorth.ca website to put data in there. Also, when we look at, like I mentioned, the Blue Skies and the Neonets and the Sault Ste. Marie and Thunder Bay areas, to look at the economic development to make sure that the businesses apply, because we need to get our fair share here in Northern Ontario. So by having the backbone more on the fiber optics, then we have more fixed wireless, will ensure that our network is stable and scalable to the 25 to 50 megs as we need to connect with businesses. So hope that answers the question. But we've put quite a few dollars into it. The COVID, the last point is universal broadband. We haven't done a request for proposals because of COVID, but after the CRTC round and COVID, hopefully we'll have a second round here of proposals and making sure that we are ready here in Northern Ontario to make sure to apply for these federal funds. And obviously working closely with the province is very, very important.
Perfect. Neil?
Great, thank you. So the next question comes with greetings and thanks from Rory Ring. Natural resources is a key to the Northern economy. How will the government advance this sector here and across Canada and protect our resources from foreign intervention and trade infringements?
Well, I'll take that one as the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources. And certainly there's a few things with that question. Certainly supports for the industry. Certainly when it comes to forestry, and we've actually invested over the past 5 years $1 billion in the forestry industry to make sure that it remains competitive and innovative as well. And a number of our sawmills and paper mills in Northern Ontario actually have received some of those supports to keep those jobs here and to make sure that there's obviously strong companies. When it comes to foreign, obviously, takeovers, so there's a whole, there's a whole way that we deal with that, certainly through Industry Canada, as well as through the Competition Bureau. But that being said, certainly the backbone of our economy in Canada, the natural resource sector, plays a key role. We've been supportive of the oil and gas sector, or the forestry sector, or the mining sector, of the nuclear sector, and we will continue to support them, because at the end of the day, these are obviously jobs that are in our communities, a lot of rural jobs as well. As we know, as when we talk about certainly climate change, and when we talk about the transition to a low carbon economy, the natural resource sector plays a key role in that transition. So we have a very, very important role to play. The mining sector, like I said, the forestry sector, as well as the oil and gas sector, because without them, we will not be able to achieve our climate targets. So we need to continue working down that in that direction, and certainly supporting the natural resource sector is key as we move forward for our economy. And when we come out of this pandemic, certainly support for that industry will continue. Merci.
Great, thank you for that answer. Now, the next question was pre-submitted. So access to medical school is very limited, with a 3% chance of admissions. Only 64 of 2,000 applicants can get in. The Northern Ontario School of Medicine is the country's smallest yet most effective and innovative school. Given the impact of the pandemic in worsening our challenges with ongoing shortage of Northern physicians, NOSM would like to increase our position and expand to train doctors for rural and remote settings, with an emphasis on addressing improved accessibility, Indigenous health, mental health, and addictions. Will you support the growth of the medical school? And what will you do to help us do so?
Thank you. Well, I'll pass it to my colleagues from the West, I guess, for Northern West. I'll start with the Minister of Health, and then Dr. Pawlowski can follow up after that. Go ahead, Patty.
Well, thank you very much. And it's a great question. I personally am extremely proud of NOSM, and I know we have a partnership with our other Northern colleagues. You're right, it's been recognized as one of the most, I suppose, successful schools in Canada in terms of, in terms of punching above its weight for academic excellence, and also for the ability to do what its original goal was, which was to recruit people to the North and keep them there, even if they marry other people, which is our secret sauce, I think. Listen, I am always excited. I know that we've invested heavily, as you know, over the last 4 or 5 years in our academic institutions, through whether it's direct funding for research and science or for infrastructure. As you know, we added, I can't remember what the name of the program is, one of my colleagues might be able to, but we were able to actually expand capacity at Northern Ontario colleges and universities in the area of technology and training. I can't see why there wouldn't be some opportunities to explore further, especially I would say infrastructure funding in terms of expanding the footprint of colleges and universities or specialized programs. Having said that, I sort of see that as the next wave of deliberations for our government. Certainly, I know there's conversations happening right now about what restarting the economy looks like and the role of infrastructure. I can tell you that our commitment to investing in research and science, and certainly health science, is, I would say, even higher than it ever has been. I think the pandemic, the arrival of COVID-19 on the world stage has reminded many governments about the importance to invest in a robust academic and research sector, if you will. And that's why we took measures just last week to make sure that we had wage subsidies for people that were working in research institutions, research assistants and the like, because we know that that's how we're going to get through this together. So listen, I'm happy to take those kinds of suggestions back. The best solution is for the member to work through an already existing stream of money that might be available. But if the member, if this question is coming from Thunder Bay, I think both MP Pawlowski and my office could assist with the development of a proposal, or at least giving you some direction in terms of which ministries might be the right ones to knock on that door for.
Perfect, thank you. Marcus, take a stab by that. Oh, you're muted, Marcus.
I'm muted. I disappeared both at the same time. How's that for a trick? Well, how about I start with the good political answer and say this is a matter of provincial jurisdiction. But going beyond that, Patty's absolutely right. It's whether you find a partner here locally that often is the pivotal thing. And there's nothing, well, I've worked enough in remote places, and if your partner doesn't want to work there, there's no way you're going to stay there, or you'll just be unhappy in life and never have a partner. So it's a big thing. But I take it the question is asking, does this suggest that we ought to put more money into NOSM and expand NOSM? Is this a good idea? I would say I'm not totally sure of that. However, I think a lot of people look for a silver lining in this cloud. And I think one of the possible silver linings medically for the North is the fact that I think this has really illustrated the unique problems of a lot of isolated communities, fly-in communities, that as yet we do not have a good answer to their healthcare problems. People who live up in those remote communities certainly are very disadvantaged. Unfortunately, the solution to most medical problems in fly-in communities is simple. You fly your plane in, you get the person, and you leave. Now what happens when you have a real epidemic, pandemic, you have multiple sick people? What are you going to do then? I think we really, as a government, have not put, and I think that's clear to a lot of people, as much resources as we ought to have put into looking after Indigenous population in those remote communities. So the silver lining in this cloud potentially is, for me, that we ought to become more of a center of excellence in dealing with the problems of remote communities. That is part of NOSM's mandate, but I would suggest we need to make it more of NOSM's mandate. We ought to establish ourselves as a real leader internationally in terms of looking after the medical problems of remote communities. We're certainly well positioned to do that, and I think after this, there will be a recognition that we have to put more resources into that. And I think NOSM could certainly position itself by promoting itself as the kind of place that can really work with the Indigenous community. And I think not just Indigenous communities, also remote white communities, to be more effective at delivering adequate healthcare services.
Thank you, Marcus. Yeah, my wife teaches there, so I've got a conflict of interest, I guess, but great institution, and certainly will be supportive of that, certainly in Sudbury as much as we can. Back to you, Neil. Mac, did you want to say a few words?
Just quickly with NOSM, and I agree with 100% with everything being said. So maybe what we could look at with NOSM is Patty, the program she's referring to is the SIF program with ISED, the department called Industry Canada, and maybe it's time because federal government invested initially on setting up an awesome. So maybe we could look at part of the SIF programming is a $15 to $20 million program to expand NOSM. And I'm sure maybe we could get NOSM to do a presentation to the Northern Ontario Caucus to see if there's a proposal that we could help them to challenge to an existing program like the SIF program with ISED. We could help them out.
Perfect.
Paul,
Terry,
well, it's such an important subject that I agree with Patty, Marcus, and Mark, and Paul. I understand you have your conflict, but how important it is. My wife also works for an eye surgeon, so healthcare is very important all across Northern Ontario. So what we can do to train local Northerners is critically important. But I also remind people that we also had the immigration pilot project that was started in Eastern Canada, available now in Northern Ontario, and that makes it easier for us to recruit and attract doctors. I used to be on the doctor recruitment committee on City Council, and so we're doing our best to train our local folks in Northern Ontario, but also this new immigration pilot project makes it easier to bring that doctor. You can bring her into Canada, but also bring her family, as has been noted. That is absolutely critical that people have their spouses and their children and everyone around them, wherever they practice in Northern Ontario. So I just thought I would remind people of that tool as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Right back to you, Neil.
Great. With universities and colleges looking to go primarily online, there will be a huge economic impact to the communities of those northern institutions. What will be the federal government, or what will the federal government do to continue to support these businesses who are losing not only worker but clientele?
I'll take a first stab at that, and maybe then after that I'll let some of my colleagues. Very, very quickly, certainly universities and colleges play a key role in all of our communities in Northern Ontario, certainly for the local population, as well as bringing in obviously people from Canada or international students, which represent a significant amount of economic stimulus. That being said, we also know that university and colleges are creations of the province. So I would encourage certainly these institutions to work with the provinces. They have a minister responsible for their institution, and then we will work with the provinces on a one-to-one basis to see what measures can be put in place. Certainly, we know that come September, I have a daughter that goes to university, and she'll be starting online. And so there's going to be pressures at many levels for the colleges and universities. But again, with respect to the funding, administration, certainly possible major loss of revenue. Again, I encourage these institutions to work with the province, then to come and certainly work with the federal government as to work in partnership to find solutions. Any of my colleagues that want to take oh, Terry?
Sure.
Terry, then Patty.
Well, Patty first.
Okay, Patty.
I just thank you, Paul. I think it is a really important distinction, though, that the province does have a responsibility in its jurisdiction in many ways. And although as a federal government from a health lens, we felt very strongly that we need to sort of be there regardless of what the need is for provinces to be able to deliver healthcare and manage the pandemic. And we felt that we needed to be there for Canadians for the financial fallout of having to stay at home. But we do expect that provinces and territories step into the space in which they are solely responsible for. And as I said earlier, we did provide, as you know, in our first mandate, quite a bit of support for colleges and universities to expand their facilities or acquire equipment for specifically technological training. But I, as a Minister of Labor, will say also in the trades, many other areas. And, you know, through the CERB, I will also remind everyone that international students who often do work throughout the year are eligible to apply for the CERB for the income maintenance component of lost earnings if they're affected by COVID. So we are trying to take care of the people behind this, but I think, you know, to Paul's point, this is a really important conversation to have with the Minister of Colleges, Training and Universities, and obviously we'll be there to help relay messages to the appropriate ministers as relevant or as we can. But I do think that first conversation does have to be with Ontario.
Terry?
Minister covered it all, so thank you.
Perfect. Marcus, we're good? Marcus?
I would say that our government has put a lot of money into assisting students get through this, the Canadian Emergency Student Benefit, the Canadian Student Service Grant, the Canadian Service Corps, tuition support in terms of broadening the eligibility for financial assistance, doubling the grant money you can get, enhancing the student loan program. So we put a lot of money, I think, into trying to help students through this, hopefully also help the universities through this. As to whether it'll be done online or whether people are going to actually physically go back to the universities, I think it's maybe a little premature to say, but I would say, again, look for the silver lining. If you're entrepreneurial, it's, I think after this, there is going to be, and there already was, I already taught a course, no, 2 courses basically online. And increasingly, I think a lot of university programs are going to be offered online. Maybe same with our meetings, you know, increasingly we're going to be doing stuff online. So there is a business opportunity for entrepreneurial teaching institutions to maybe make the best of this and establish themselves and their ability to do things virtually.
Thank you. All right, Neil, back to you.
Okay. This is part of the question and answer. So what specifically is the federal government doing to help independent retailers in Northern Ontario with their cost to innovate and embrace technology? Up until now, retailers have not been able to apply for government grants and subsidies for research, development, technology, training, and marketing. I expect that many retailers will not be able to survive this pandemic. This is the time for the government to invest with grants and subsidies to spur on creative solutions and new business models. Unfortunately, FedNor continues to exclude retailers. Can funds be expedited to support independent retail transformative solutions? Or, yeah, so that's the question.
That's the question. I think I'll turn that one over to Terry. I know obviously they mentioned FedNor as and certainly as the pandemic brings to light a lot of certainly gaps in our system. Certainly that's something that we turned our minds to, as to look at what measures that we can put in place. And maybe I'll let Terry take a stab at that. Go ahead.
Well, thank you very much for that question. And through the many chats that I've had with businesses here around the Soo in Northern Ontario and through the chamber networks, is that it's become apparent that the way we're doing business now during COVID-19 is significantly different from before, and how we do business going forward will continue to be significantly different. And a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises are embracing technology like we've never seen before. Whereby how we're offering product and service is significantly different. There's still buying a lot of local, but it's done through IT-related resources and infrastructure. So, going to Mark Sore's point is that, we also have to start with some baseline things about making sure that people are connected properly in Northern Ontario, and we have undertaken to do that in significant ways in various forms. On specific programming related to retail, there are programs that the federal government has and continues to have. And how we do fund things is through a lot of our networks. So the federal government funds things like FedNor, and also the CFDCs, the Community Future Development Corporation. And you've seen the regional relief and recovery fund, to help businesses not only stabilize themselves and recover. So there's going to be various needs. I would suggest to those small businesses to open up those dialogues with not only FedNor, but the CFDCs that have received almost equal funding and are extremely important in our network that we have funded throughout time to see what needs they might need. For instance, if they're not eligible for the CEBA program, which is a $40,000 interest-free loan with forgivability of 25%, which could be used in a various manners to support your business offering, and support your cash flow. Well, you might be able to use that, going forward as you adapt and change your business modeling. I take a look at other programs that we do have and currently do fund through FedNor, including things, and I'll use an example here locally in Sault Ste. Marie. We fund things like an innovation center. And there are many of these kind of organizations throughout Northern Ontario called different things. And they also have some funding that's available for various businesses, from soup to nuts, if you allow me to use the expression. But and I've seen various businesses incorporate technology through these loan/grant programs that are there. So there are different tools. I would suggest that individual reach out to FedNor or myself, to have that discussion. But there are already existing tools that they might be able to adapt. Plus, during this COVID-19, there are resources to stabilize themselves. So that is. And the third piece is continue to keep those suggestions coming, because we're going to take a look at how else we might continue to support business throughout Northern Ontario. So thank you, Paul and Neil and the questioner.
Thank you. We're good. Anybody else? Neil?
Okay.
Next question.
The next question is, funding the Bear Train passenger service from Soo to Hearst would be a quick way to kickstart the post-COVID economic recovery. What can be done to secure the operational funds from Transport Canada?
Again, I'll let that one to Terry. We've heard of that from that project for a while, so I'll let Terry update us on that.
Well, thank you, Paul, and thank you, Paul, for recognizing the advocacy that I've done to the Northern Ontario Liberal Caucus on this matter, and
Yes.
It's something I strongly believe in. I think that, and this is something that the Northern Ontario Liberal Caucus continually discusses on how we can connect Northern Ontarians, and that is through rail, is through bus, it's through roads and boats and a number of things. So we continue to support those. Now for the bear train, this government had announced about $199,000 available for a business plan, because through the efforts of Chief Gauthier and his entire team and network, they've stepped up to the plate where other folks have tried to get this off the ground a couple of times. And just recently, a few months ago, they allocated another $30,000 that they upgraded their business plan. I've spoken with the chief recently before the COVID-19. I've also spoken with people like Dan Freya from the Community Development Corporation here, and Sault Ste. Marie that's also a part of that. So I can just tell you that my commitment is to continue to advocate strongly for the bear train and all transportation networks. And a little bit of good news recently was the Ontario Northline just announced the bus service, which will connect Northern Ontario throughout Northern Ontario. So, the bus doesn't stop in Sault Ste. Marie. You can continue on to Thunder Bay, to Kenora. You can come back through to Sudbury. That was important. And Paul will remember, and Mark and Patty, that we had the Northern Ontario Liberal Caucus in North Bay, and Ontario Northland was there to discuss it. It's a provincial body. But I think that this COVID-19 has shown that the federal and provincial government can work very closely together. And I think there might be opportunities to further explore not only the bus, but perhaps train partnerships as well, as we know Ontario Northline is a part of. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Terry. I think Marcus want to say a few words. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if Patty will confirm this, but I think the holy grail of politics in Thunder Bay is to bring the train back, the Via Rail through Thunder Bay. I think a lot of people have tried to do that in the past. I can certainly agree that having better forms of surface transportation is really important to Northern Ontario. Of my 5.9 kids, 2 of them refuse to fly and live in BC, which means I don't see very much of them. And now without the bus and without the train, there's no way of getting here. And as well, this is really important for a lot of, I think, isolated communities for a whole bunch of reasons. For medical reasons, a lot of people have to get to appointments. They can't get to them if there's no bus or no train to bring samples like blood samples, water samples. We need it for that. But I think also, for example, abused women, if you're in a remote community and you don't have a car, or your spouse has the car, how do you get out if things get bad? And the bus and the train has traditionally been one of the ways. So I think it has been a topic of frequent conversation in Northern Ontario Caucus, and I think it's something we have to continue to hammer home. Now, for the rest of the country, there's not a whole heck of a lot of us up here in Canada, and so to make national policies for the sake of the few of us up here is a little bit difficult. But I think we certainly, well, I don't know, I can't speak for all of you, but I think we all support the idea of improving within Northern Ontario.
Thank you, Marcus. All right, Neil, next question.
Sure. All right. So the next question, and here we go. Under the rural and northern immigration pilot, would you consider loosening the rules to allow doctors and medical staff from abroad to come more quickly to Northern Ontario to help with COVID-19 impact rather than having to wait a year or more?
Patty, do you want to take that one?
Well, I can try, except that I'm not really, I wouldn't say that I'm an immigration expert. Certainly, I think the whole point of the rural and northern immigration pilot is to get talented, skilled people to Northern Ontario and keep them. So I'm interested to see what the rules are around that. And actually, it's I have to confess my total ignorance. I have no idea why there would be a delay for those specific professionals. So certainly we can take it back and look at it. In terms of licensing and credentialing, that's a whole other subject, and certainly we've been investing in trying to support people to harmonize their credentials with Canadian credentials through a variety of different funding streams. As a former Minister of Employment, I can tell you there's, for example, small loans and all kinds of things available to people who want to pursue ensuring that their credentials are Canadian and recognized by Canadian hospitals and the like, licensing bodies. But in terms of the delay, in terms of those professionals applying for the rural immigration pilot, I'm not sure why that exists. All I can say is I can commit to going back and looking into it, unless one of the fellows have any deeper knowledge of that particular aspect of the immigration pilot.
Well, Patty, it's good. I'm not aware as well as of any delays going on, but with respect to, as you said, when it comes to medical professionals and accreditation, there's a whole other independent body that takes care of that. And so, and for obvious reasons, and I know there's some frustrations out there, but there's a mechanism for them to be recognized here, and I'm sure Marcus can opine on that as well. But just very quickly, certainly, and to answer the question, sort of the immigration pilot project was really made for different jobs and it has to be an employer looking for an employee, right? So you need to be sponsored to come here,
right?
And unless there's a
right.
hospital that wants to sponsor you or not. And I think that's kind of the difference there. Is you need a sponsor to bring those jobs in, to bring those employers in here. So that's why I think, in a nutshell, that's kind of maybe to answer that question of why the discrepancy that is there. Marcus, you want to say something, and maybe Mark want to add something as well? Marcus?
Yeah, I think the problem isn't with getting people here and through the pilot project. There's historically been a lot of people from other countries living in Canada who are medically qualified. The problem is getting your licensure within Ontario, and that's a provincial jurisdiction. I know, having done my internship at St. Joseph's Health Center in Toronto, I used to joke that if I had a problem with the delivery, I could ask the guy cleaning the floors, because he was probably an obstetrician from Syria or Guatemala or something. So there's a lot of people out there. It's a problem with recognizing and or providing some means whereby those people could upgrade their skills and be able to qualify to work in remote places. But it is something that the colleges do, which is provincial jurisdiction. But I think it is a problem that needs to be addressed. As for actually, during at least that last month, Ontario had made exceptional provisions to allow foreign graduates to be temporarily licensed in Ontario to deal with the COVID-19 problem. I don't know if whether that's over, if it still exists.
And when you talk about college, you mean the college of the CPSO, the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario. I clear that up. And Marc, Marc.
Yes, I'll just add, obviously the licensing issue for profession is something that needs to be addressed, but there's really two elements. There's a provincial nominee program that we're working closely with the province, and the provincial nominee program has close to 7,000 placements. Most of those placements are in Southern Ontario, so we have to try and get some of that to Northern Ontario, and that's why we worked hard as MPs to set up the Rural and Northern Immigration Pilot Project. So when they're asking the question here about that specific pilot project, yes, right now each individual district that has received or successful in the application with the Immigration Department is looking at the needs of their local area, like in the Sioux, like in Sudbury, Timmins, Thunder Bay. So each individual will look at prioritizing, but that's why we have this Rural Immigration Pilot Project, is to streamline some of the red tape that exists. But the program has just started, and there is specific quotas per district, but the majority of these successful cities that receive funding are in Northern Ontario because of the advocacy that we all did to make sure that we have this program in place. So we'll take this back to make sure that we continue removing that red tape and to ensure that we have that right balance of the professionals, especially medical community, coming into Northern Ontario.
Merci, Marc. Neil?
Great. The next question has to do with, if I can find it again, the CESB. So many students have just as many financial responsibilities as anyone else and rely heavily on summer jobs to help with the next year's tuition. While the CESB is good, it's less than the CERB, even though students have to pay the same costs of living. Why is it less, and what other supports will there be for students who have more than likely now lost summer jobs?
Good question. Certainly who wants to take a, who wants to answer that? Patty, want to
Well,
take it first time?
I can't speak to the amount and how that was determined, but what I can say is that in fact what we've done is increase funding for Canada Summer Jobs all across the country, and including expanding access to companies by paying for 100% of the salary, for example, giving much more flexible terms around Canada Summer Jobs in terms of how long the person can stay on, whether or not they'll be part-time or full-time. So certainly the success of students is top of mind for us. The fact that we have supports in place for students is certainly important, but I think what's even more important for many summer students is the opportunity to get work experience.
Exactly, and just maybe remind people that this is a $9 billion program that we put forward for students, and this is the first time that of this magnitude, recognizing the problems. And certainly, so there's certainly great support there. We want to certainly support students at the same time as, support them that if they want to find work as well, that they're able to, so that there's not a disincentive. So we need to, again, as the minister said, we want to make sure that we get the students the job experience that they desperately need to get to the job markets once they're done their degrees. Terry, want to say a few words? Oh,
yeah, sure. I think that to my original comments about when we cast that net as far and as wide as we could to catch as many people as we could with the original program of the Canada Emergency Benefit. But again, through feedback, we had heard that students that, and again, when we announced this stuff, it was a very fluid situation with COVID-19. And we are responding quickly as possible, and we did. And then we started getting feedback, and we had heard from our young people in Northern Ontario and across Canada that they also needed a program. So we announced the Canada Emergency Student Benefit, and since Friday, the number is very significant. 277,000 students have already applied for that program. So it is significant, and many of them are across Northern Ontario. And we know that many of the students need to work to be able to pay for the provincial tuitions that have been mandated, but we also deferred all the student loans as well to keep and secure the students as we came out of this. And I remind folks that students are still eligible to work as they have the that particular benefit in mind and can maintain some of that revenue. And as well, if they have dependents, that number is significantly increases as well. So it was a response. So there's many tools in the toolbox that's available. Patty has mentioned them, Paul, you've mentioned them, Mark and Marcus, that there's another layer of supports as well, the Canada Summer program that now small businesses, chamber members are eligible for 100% to employ people as well. So I just wanted to make those comments and actually quote the number of folks that almost 300,000 that are getting it right now or have been approved.
Yeah, Patty, you wanted to finish your thought there? You want to say a few?
Oh, I just wanted to also point out that anyone over the age of 15 who's earned $5,000 a month or a year or in the previous year is eligible for CERB.
Yeah.
So some of those students who have worked part-time would be eligible for CERB, which would be obviously more money than the emergency students benefit. And of course, it's their prerogative which approach they take. But we know that many young people who worked part-time throughout their education or their year would be eligible for CERB as well. And I think, the focus for us is just trying to be as flexible with these programs so that, as my colleagues have pointed out, that no matter what your circumstance, there's a pot for you to help you with your own particular challenge or your own particular setting. We know that not all students are made the same way. Some students are adults who work part-time. Some students are younger who haven't worked during the year, and we wanted to make sure that there was support for them. I think the loans is very important. important. I also think the doubling of grants is very important. So, trying to make sure that more students have less debt when they graduate, acknowledging that this is going to be a rocky couple of years for them. We know that there's a higher degree of risk for young people just graduating into an economy that's taken a hit like this. So I think we'll have our eye on the success of students as we have over the last 5 years. And obviously we believe they're a critical component to growing our economy.
Perfect, exactly. Anything else? Nope. Neil, next question.
Yeah, okay, so there's a number of different questions left on the question and answer board, but some of them are quite specific and may require some background. So I just wanted to let the attendees know that all the questions will be offered to the panelists for consideration. So if we don't get to your question specifically tonight, it will be brought to their attention. So in the interest of time, I'm going to try and join together. Everything keeps moving around. Okay, I'm going to try and join together two questions, just so we don't repeat ourselves. But so first of all, thank you for your leadership at this difficult time. My question surrounds the infrastructure to spur economic growth when we can operate a little bit more. Curious if you see any additional programs being created over and above in the Investing in Canada infrastructure programs or growth to the overall programs. And then what I'm going to tie in there is, will the government support using Canadian-made goods and services in infrastructure projects and procurement?
Maybe I'll take a quick stab at that, and then I'll let others provide their thoughts. And certainly, right now, all the focus has been certainly making sure that people have food on the table and shelter. That's been the number one. But as we obviously look down the road, yeah, for sure, we're having those conversations as to how we can stimulate the economy. And infrastructure, we've already put a historic amount of investments in infrastructure in Canada, and that will play a key role as well. And so that goes from our municipalities, that goes from our colleges and universities, and there is funding that is there. And so as we turn our minds to stimulating and restarting the economy, we know that infrastructure will play a key role. And with respect to buying Canadian, there's already provisions there that are supportive of that. And I think we certainly, as I mentioned before, as we have a climate lens to this as well, as we embark on this new, certainly on down this new path, certainly we need to take that all into consideration. Canadian technology, Canadian made, in innovation, and certainly we are leaders in that in the clean tech world. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for Canadian businesses there, and certainly there are conversations that are being made. But as I said, right now, as of today, certainly May 19th, it's about making sure that there's still people that are maybe falling through the cracks, and we're trying to make sure that we're getting that net, as Terry has mentioned, is wide enough to make sure that they are supported. Any of my colleagues want to provide an answer to that? No, Patty, good. Good. Okay, Neil.
Okay, so the next question is a little, and this will be our last, is a little bit more forward-looking. So we've talked a lot about the current situation and the current tools and mitigations that have been put in place today, but everyone wants to know what's happening, what's next. So the question is, has the government done any analysis on what the economic recovery will look like? And what kind of support will be needed after the country opens up? And what if we face a recession?
Just very quickly, and I'll share it with everybody.
Go ahead.
I think we are in a recession. I think there's no doubt about that. I think that I know we always got to be looking back as to determine if it's a recession or not. That's pretty. Again, I'm pretty confident that we're there in these unprecedented time in the history of our country. Certainly, as we're looking forward, certainly I know there's been discussions in that finance. There are discussions on a daily basis, right? This is. We don't talk about this publicly because these are just conversations that are being had, different models, how will this look, exploration, so and that's how government works basically. And then once policies develop and they land on something, and certainly that's our job too, is to advocate some ideas that we're hearing from constituents, from business owners as to how this recovery could look like, ideas to create policy. And after that, that's where government lands on creating these policies. So it's input from the general public, input from members of parliament, input from members of obviously the other governing party, input from ministers, obviously. So that's kind of how the things develop. So yes, there are. As to exactly what they are, no, obviously those are being hashed out right now. Maybe Patty, you're at the table, so you can give us your insight as to what's going on.
Yeah, well, thanks, Paul. We've said it a lot. These are unprecedented times. And I mean, even economic policy that's well understood, generally doesn't account for a supply and a demand shock at the same time. And so the challenge, whether you're talking from a health lens or from a finance lens, is that there's sort of like no precedent in our history, at least our recent history, of what to do next. Things, obviously the world has had other pandemics, but has dealt with them differently. For example, the Spanish flu was 100 years ago. So what we might do now is obviously going to be completely different. But I will say this, we do have our eye on what we're calling the living with COVID reality. I mean, while we all sort of hope and pray for a vaccine, I think the whole world is focused on accelerating research around a vaccine. The reality is this is long and arduous science that takes science is hard. I keep telling people, everybody wants a solution yesterday, but science is hard, and our science community is working with the international science community on all of those kinds of answers. But in the meantime, it is really a new normal, and it's a new normal from a financial perspective as well, because of course we've had to rapidly spend a lot of money to keep things afloat, including this amazing business community that I spoke about, but also all citizens really that have been affected and have been laid off during this time or have had experienced other kinds of economic shocks. And so we're in kind of an exploratory stage, I would say, about what happens next. What we do know is that we're going to need to transition very carefully to the next step, which is, as we start to remove benefits, as you can imagine, we're not going to keep wage subsidies at 75% for the rest of our lives, as much as I'm sure the small business community would like it, nor will there be CERB likely for an indefinite period of time. So we have to be doing this in a very careful way, just as we're doing from the health lens, where we're easing into a new normal and slowly removing restrictions on people's behaviors so that we can actually balance that sort of social freedom with what's happening on the healthcare side. We're gonna have to do that on the finance side too. Slowly start to look at measures that we can remove and then replace with other stimulus measures to make sure that we can actually drive the economy forward. I think we can do it. I think Canadians are incredibly resilient and innovative, but those are the conversations, and we're not doing them alone, thankfully. There's an international community having these very conversations because the entire world is seized with these questions.
Perfect. Mark, you want to join in?
Well, I'll just add, obviously, I agree 100% with what Paul and Patty just mentioned. And as we look at, and Neil, to the question too, the second part of the question, when you're looking at the recovery and tie it into the other question that was asked previously, infrastructure is key. We need to work, and we're going to continue to work with the province of Ontario and our municipalities to ensure that we have that infrastructure investment to stimulate the economy, to modernize our municipalities, to look at the long-term job creation. There is no better stimulus package linked to infrastructure to support workers and to support modernization of our communities, especially in Northern Ontario. So infrastructure will be key to make sure that we do this. We will be working closely. We have a program with the province and the federal government, and we need to make sure that over this summer and next summer that investment is happening all across Northern Ontario from an infrastructure perspective.
Thank you, Mark. Terry?
And I think that just expanding on what was said before, obviously FedNor will be an important tool in our toolbox as we, come out of this COVID-19 and, a very phased approach and a very responsible approach. And going forward, the Regional Relief and Recovery Fund is to stabilize right now. And a lot of our measures were to stabilize. That was our stimulus funding. I've had many conversations with people. This is unprecedented. We've never seen this kind of stimulus funding, and the fact that it was built on putting food on the table and paying bills and stabilizing the Canadian market. Where we had a really great position was the great work that Canadians did over the last 5 years to put us in a good position where we could respond the way we did. We look at other countries and some of the challenges that they're facing, which are unenviable in our eyes, but we know that eventually we will probably get back to we will get back to a more traditional stimulus funding, such as in 2000, 2008, whereby we're looking at, building and, universities and colleges funding that Patty alluded to, in 2016, where we, this is just one, I'm not saying this is what we're doing, but, $87 million that was put into colleges and universities across Northern Ontario, which created short-term jobs, but created a really long-term competitive advantage for Northern Ontario. So we're going to be looking at stimulus funding going forward once Ontario and Canada starts opening up, where traditional stimulus funding will support not only building, but putting money in people's pocket with the intention for them to spend on main streets throughout Northern Ontario. And FedNor will play a role in that. And we're continually going to be reaching back to networks like the Chamber of Commerce networks to get your advice and your thoughts on that, because there's nothing more important than grassroots. And that's what, regional economic development agencies represent, like FedNor, is grassroots. Because not only just Northern Ontario, but what makes sense in Thunder Bay is really important, but there might be another solution in North Bay. And, those will be entertained, and we will look at those going forward. So again, thanks to everyone. So.
Thank you, Terry. All right, Neil, want to?
Yeah.
So that was the last question?
That was the last question. So I'd like to thank the Northern Ontario Liberal Caucus for joining us this evening and answering questions and providing some guidance in this difficult time. I want you, sorry, did I lose my connection there?
You're good.
No, I'm good? Okay, good. So I want to thank our local sponsors for supporting this town hall and for your continued support of your respective chambers. I would also like to thank our attendees for their participation. We hope you found this webinar helpful. As we progress through this pandemic, please don't hesitate to reach out to your local chamber for assistance. On behalf of the Northern Ontario Chamber Network, thank you for joining us and for your continued support. Be safe out there.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup.